All right. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And welcome to tonight's program and exploring gap year options webinar. My name is Ashley Williams, and as the USA Gap Year Fairs Outreach Coordinator, I wanted to extend a huge thank you to everybody for spending your evening with us. A little bit about who's speaking to you right now. As an educational professional, as an international education professional, I've witnessed firsthand the transformative power of gap year experiences. Having been part of Go Overseas' past 3 annual Gap Year Fair scholarships, winners' journeys, I've had the honor of presenting each one of them with a giant $5,000 check to take a gap year. Last year, I was fortunate enough to experience a gap year program myself by doing a site visit with a program provider, Spanish Gap Year, where I immersed myself in Basque cooking and traditional pottery making. This experience only reinforced my belief in the immense value of experiential learning and the importance of taking time to explore the world around us. As somebody who has studied abroad during their college years, I can attest to the life-changing impact that these experiences can have on one's personal and professional growth. Before we get started, I just wanted to note that USA Gap Year Fairs is put on at 30 to 40 different high schools across the nation every January through March to empower students, parents, and educators to learn more about gap year options. This past year, we held a Gap Year Fair at the Henry N. Gunn High School in Palo Alto, and we're excited to bring this information session to you virtually. These fairs are powered by GoOverseas.com, and Go Overseas is a community-centered resource for all different types of travel experiences. You can think of us like Yelp, but for meaningful travel programs. You can visit Go Overseas to read verified alumni reviews, find programs, browse articles and guides, and learn about scholarship opportunities, including our annual $5,000 Gap Year Scholarship. Every year, Go Overseas offers a Gap Year tuition scholarship, and this is a $5,000 scholarship that goes towards a provider's Gap Year program. We have so much fun awarding the winner every year. If all of the gap opportunities available to you out there make your head spin, we recommend that you can start with our Gap Matcher. This is a customizable quiz that you can take that will help you find your top programs to consider based on your interests. And additionally, we have created a digital 2024 Gap Year Guide for you to browse through for more program options. For brief descriptions, including age range of the programs and contact information for each program, as well as accredited Gap Year counselors and additional resources. We'll be sure to link those both in the chat. And so now I'm very excited to welcome Jason Soroyan, our keynote speaker and Gap Year expert for tonight's event. Jason has over a decade of experience as a Gap Year expert matching young adults to programs of their dreams. Jason will give you a thorough overview of the Gap Year option for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we should have about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So thanks again and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I'm going to present my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Ashley, are you able to see it? Excellent. Great. As Ashley said, I'm Jason Soroyan. I am from the Bay Area. I originally grew up in San Mateo, just up the road from you all. I went to Hillsdale High School, go Knights, and I went to college at UC San Diego. I work as a gap year counselor or consultant or coach, and I work with my wife, Jane. We established an organization called J2 Guides, and our role really is to help individuals who are considering this idea of gap time to decide if it's the right opportunity for them at this point in their lives. And if it is, to help them establish really meaningful goals that they'll pursue during that time and connect them with reputable and vetted organizations, internships, and opportunities all over the world. I serve as one of the board members for the Gap Year Association, as well as for over a decade now, the co-chair of the Gap Year Association Standards and Accreditation Committee. So this has been a field that I've invested my entire adult life in, as a field leader, as a program director, as a Gap Year program executive director, and now for the last 14 years as a Gap Year coach. Tonight, we're going to talk about quite a few different things, but really what I want to get to the heart to is what is a gap year, and ultimately help you decide if it's the right opportunity for you or for your child, if you're here on behalf of that person. So what is a gap year? I mentioned that I serve on the board of the Gap Year Association, and one of the things that we've been doing this last year is working in our strategic plan and really redefining what is a gap year. And this is the new definition that we've created. Essentially, a gap year is an intentional period of time devoted to personal growth and exploration through experiential learning opportunities. And one of the things that we love about this definition is that it is so open-ended and it's so holistically encompassing of what an individual might be thinking about for taking this time. So one of the things that this doesn't state is how long you have to take. It is called a gap year, and that's a British term, but really in the United States, we talk about it more as gap time, and we use the terms interchangeably. And I say that because sometimes I'll work with students who are graduating from high school and they have 3 months of time before they go on to, say, college or whatever their next educational opportunity is. But in that 3 months, they can have a very powerful growth opportunity. To us, that's gap time. Other students are admitted during January, so they're getting an offer from the school of their dreams, but it's to come in the winter. And so they might have 6 months of time after they graduate high school and before they go on to college. 6 months of time, wow, you could do a ton with that. A more typical gap year for a student who's graduating from high school is maybe 9 or even 12 months, but the timeline is really up to you, as is when you choose to take this. In the US, we often think about gap year students as being folks who have recently graduated high school and who are going on to take this time before whatever is next for them. And that could be community college, it could be a 4-year university, it could be going to a trade school, it could be going to the military, it could be going right into the working world or something else. And that's wonderful, but there's also lots of college students who would take what we would deem to be gap time, or students who have graduated from college who want to take a break and maybe seek out a professional opportunity or figure out what's next for them before going on. That's also gap time. And if you're lucky enough to be an adult who's in the middle of their professional career and you can take time away, great, that can be gap time for you too, although we all know that that's a lot harder. The takeaway from this is that gap time is meant to be a productive break. It's meant to be very intentional. And this is meant to be a learning opportunity where you're really getting out into the world, challenging your comfort zone, and moving into a space where you're learning and growing through these hands-on experiential opportunities. If you take away one thing from this, one myth demystified from tonight, it's this idea that a gap year is truly about taking you from where you are right now, point A, maybe that for you is senior year, high school graduation, and moving you towards your self-identified point B. Perhaps that's a 4-year college. Gap year is not going to derail you from that. But what it is going to offer you is, instead of that straight path there, the shorter path to get to point B, it's going to give you a journey. And on that journey, we get to meander, we get to explore. And one of the things that I found out during my own gap time at UC San Diego was that by taking this time to apply all that I'd learned in the classroom and put it to use in the world, that I was able to take all of that real world experience and then bring it back into college again, and actually felt like I had something really clear to say. I had lenses I was looking through because of the experience I had. And ultimately, I really wanted to be able to share the experiences I'd had with other people because it informed a much richer dialogue. That is what a gap year is all about. It's not about derailing you and changing your point B. We want you to go from A to B, but ultimately the journey is something that allows us to grow, to mature, and really enhance the ability that we have to be successful at that next space. So when I was in college, I was studying conservation and wildlife biology. My gap time was to go to Tanzania and East Africa and study in a very hands-on way, tracking elephants on foot, living with a group of hunter-gatherers, working with wildlife rangers in the Serengeti who are managing lions and really listening a lot to their lion calls at night. And through that experience, I really clarified for myself what it was that I wanted out of that next point of my education. That's the essence of gap time. Whatever you choose to do during your gap year, we found that there are four pretty key ingredients that need to be inherent in any activity that you choose in order for a gap year to be successful. And so I want you to think about this broadly because working could be part of your gap year, volunteering could be a part of your gap year, an amazing group program like what you'd find on the USA Gap Year Fairs website could be a great part of your gap year. Work exchange options could be a great part of your gap year. No matter what it is that you choose to do, bring in these four ingredients. And the first one is intention. So we're choosing this, right? This is just like the choice to go to college. It's an active choice. We're not stumbling upon it. We're not falling into it. This is something that we are saying, I'm choosing to take a gap year, and thus I'm putting my intention and all of my energy towards making this be a successful experience. During COVID, we heard a lot of people talking about, oh, so many students aren't going on to college. They're all taking gap years. But many of those students actually weren't leaving their homes. That was a nap year, right? And a gap year is actually about getting out. It's about getting out into the world. It's not about being in your parents' basement playing Xbox. It's about getting out there and learning life skills. And there's lots of ways to do that. The second critical ingredient is building in structure into your gap time. So every day having something that you're waking up to, that you're getting engaged in. And again, that could be an amazing volunteer experience, working hands-on with animals or working with children in literacy. It could be an amazing group program that you're a part of that's traveling or it's wilderness leadership based. It could be an amazing internship where you're actually working in the professional world, but we want to be able to get up every day and know that we've got this structure built in place because the structure is what gives us context for reflection. It also builds in the third ingredient, which is a measure of mentorship. Oftentimes in life, we're very lucky if we are able to stumble upon 3 or 4 or 5 amazing mentors in our life. But a gap year is all about great mentorship. We want to align ourselves with adults who are super passionate about the experiences that we're excited about, the topics that we're excited about, and we want those folks to ultimately nurture our passion. We want them to teach us the skills, we want them to hold the boundaries for us, and ultimately to kind of usher us into that space that they're already engaged in. Mentorship is a key ingredient, and it's one of the things that makes gap year different than just, say, getting a job at your local convenience store. There's no guarantee that your boss is going to be a mentor, even though working at a convenience store has intention, it has structure, and ultimately, hopefully, it's got some measure of peers involved, which is the fourth ingredient. But we want to seek out that mentorship. Finally, we found that gap year students really thrive when they put themselves in situations with other people who are their own age. And does that mean you have to be 18? It doesn't mean you have to put yourself with other 18-year-olds. It could be with people who are 18 to 25. But what we found is that gap year is full of a small measure of adversity. And ultimately, that adversity is something that we want to encounter and engage with people who are in the same space and chapter of life that we are. When we go into situations with people who are much older than us and much younger than us, we don't always share the same frame of relevance. And so ultimately, aligning yourself with peers is a critical aspect of gap time. It doesn't have to be for your whole time, but we found that students who do engage with their peers throughout their gap year ultimately end up suggesting that their gap year was successful and something that they were very, very pleased and happy with. Great. So you've got these four ingredients, which is kind of amazing. So when Jane, my wife, and I start talking with students who are thinking about taking gap years, we want to ask them lots of different questions. But the first question we always start with, and the question that I'd encourage you to start with, is why? Why are you taking a gap year? Why are you thinking about a gap year? I would ask you the same question if I were a college counselor. Why are you thinking about going to college? It's not the first question is not where you want to go. It's not necessarily even what you want to study. It's what is your motivation for going? I studied a lot of theater in high school and some in college. And when we're working to become a character, we want to understand that person's motivation. Well, you are the main character in your own story. You should understand your motivation. And so if I were asking you or your child, what's your motivation? What's your why for taking gap time? I'd encourage you to really think about what the answers are. And on the screen right now, you'll see several of the most commonly cited reasons why students that we work with and students nationally choose to take gap time. Maybe you resonate with one of these. Maybe you resonate with all of them. Maybe you don't resonate with any of them and you have your own reasons. But identifying your reasons is ultimately going to support you in choosing the options that are going to be best for you in terms of achieving your goals. So, for example, if you're an individual who's academically burnt out because you worked your hiney off in high school in order to get into college, perhaps one of the things that you want to avoid during your gap year is an academic setting. That doesn't mean avoiding an intellectual setting. It just might mean you don't want to be in the classroom. That is a critical thing to know because there's lots of great academic programs in gap year and there's lots of more experiential options. You're going to want to look in the right place to start. Maybe COVID hit you really hard, like it hit so many of us, and you're utilizing your gap year to work on your mental health or your physical health. This is an important ingredient to think about when you start looking at options. So understanding your whys is really, really important aspect of this. Additionally, if you're a senior, and right now, hopefully we've got some senior families here on the call or folks watching this webinar. If you're a senior, most likely, most of the adults in your life have started to or will begin asking you one question, which is, Jason, you're a senior who's about to graduate. What's coming next? And having an answer like, oh, I'm planning to go on to blank college is a really wonderful, easy option for many adults in our culture to digest. It's very normalized. But if you're taking a gap year, obviously most adults are going to be like, firstly, what's a gap year? And you're going to say, oh, it's this amazing intentional period of time where I go out of my comfort zone and explore the world through hands-on opportunities. I heard it from this guy, Jason. But beyond that, they're going to say, okay, wonderful. That sounds like a great idea, but why are you doing this? And if you understand your whys and say, well, grandma, you know that I've worked so hard in high school and that I'm feeling really burnt out. I got into that great college of my dreams. I'm really excited about going there. And ultimately, I'd like to pursue my curiosity about medicine and biology because I've been studying it in high school, but I just am not sure if that's what I want to major in college. Most adults are going to think with their practical brain and say, wow, you seem to have thought about this. It sounds really engaging. I don't know much about it, but it sounds like you've really thought it through. How can I help you? And that's the reality, is that most adults really do want to help. So again, beginning with your why not only helps you clarify what directions you're looking in for opportunities, but it helps you recruit adult support, which is going to be pivotal for you later on in your gap time. Once you've made the decision to take a gap year and once you've established your whys, you get to start answering all these awesome questions of like, where do I want to go? And what do I want to do? And who do I want to be with when I'm doing these amazing activities? And what do I want to learn? And there's lots of answers that we have to come up with in our planning. Thankfully, you don't have to have all these answers tonight. This is a slow build process. It's kind of a smolder, but the reality is we do need to put a little bit of effort into it. So for example, what are my priorities? Where is it that I might want to travel if I did travel? What is it that I want to learn? Who do I want to be around? Is it an international experience? Is it domestic? Do we have a budget to pay for an amazing experience so I can pay to be a part of this awesome opportunity? Or does all of it have to be work exchange? Do I have to make money? These are critical questions, and there's many others to answer with your family as you're planning the general macro view of your gap year. But as we start getting into the nuanced micro view, the more granular view of specific opportunities, then we start answering other kinds of questions. So let's say that we decided that we want to go to, like a student I talked to today, we want to go to Latin America, we want to be in a Spanish-speaking country, and we want to be immersed in the Spanish language. Well, how long is that for? How big of a priority is it? Is this a 1 week thing or is this a 3 month thing? If I wanted to learn cooking, do I want to go to a 3 month chef's culinary academy? Or am I looking for like a 2 week course that's going to teach me to make 5 meals so that I don't starve once I go into college? What's your motivation? What are your priorities? Are you somebody who's really interested in urban settings? Are you more interested in going to places that are rural? Are you excited about going to places where there's not running water or electricity that's happening regularly? Or are you somebody who really likes your creature comforts, like really good, predictable coffee and internet that works all the time? All of these are important questions to answer for yourself. And again, thinking constantly about what is my comfort zone, but also what's going to allow me to challenge and stretch myself, because that's what we want to do in your gap year. Additionally, I mentioned this idea of being around your peers, and there are many opportunities to be in a group-based experience, but also there is merit in going off and doing things independently, and choosing very specifically in your gap year where you want to be independent is going to allow you to really flourish once you've got the skills to feel confident to do so. When we are done with the brainstorming phase, then we get to start laying out all these priorities. And if there's a takeaway slide for you to take a photo of tonight, it's probably this one. And there's a simple concept on here that we want to present to you, which we often refer to as a gap year progression. So it regularly comes as a surprise to people that we're talking to that you can actually get involved in multiple things in your gap year. If you're somebody who's really keen on musical theater and you want to pursue musical theater as a thread throughout your entire gap year, that doesn't mean you have to just do one program. It means you could get involved in 3 or 4 or 5 things dedicated to that topic, or marine biology, or fashion, or art history, or wilderness leadership, right? Like you could have an entire gap year crafted around one centralized theme. Or you could choose to have multiple different interest areas represented at different times in your gap year. So imagine it as chapters of your gap year. And one way you could lay it out would be a very easy, simple fall, winter, spring. It's very clean, right? Fall is September through November or December. Winter is January through March. Spring is April through June, right? It's very simple. It's a generalized concept. But if you look at it this way and you think about this idea of a progression, what we want to encourage you to do is we want you to start in a place of greatest support. So if you want to really challenge yourself and get out of your family's home and you wanted to travel somewhere that felt exciting but like a real stretch, we encourage you to go with adults who are wanting to be mentors, leaders, facilitators, individuals who want to teach you about how to thrive in these environments. And they're going to give you the chance to practice skills and really become competent and very confident so that by the end of this more more facilitated experience, you will feel like you're standing on your own 2 feet, which is great because then in the winter, perhaps you choose something that's slightly more independent, something that offers you a little bit more of a powered agency. For example, volunteering. There's thousands and thousands of volunteer experiences from 1 week all the way up to several months that you might get involved with. In those experiences, you don't have leaders, you have supervisors. The same thing would be true of an internship. So you might surround yourself with peers in some amazing internship, but you're the one calling the shots about when you go to bed at night. You're the one deciding what you're doing on the weekend. Again, you're building natural steps of independence. And what we see by the end of many students' gap years, presuming a 9 to 12-month gap year, is that spring chapter is where students are really flourishing on their own. This is where students are going to live independently. They're often working and making money independently. This is where they take on that thing that was their big goal, and they're actually ready for it because at each consecutive step, they were building skills and applying those skills, and then being able to build off those skills into the next space. So it's a simple concept, but if you implement this and you don't dive right into the deep end first, but you ultimately start in a space where you're learning and getting support and move to that place of greater independence, you're likely going to find success and the right amount of challenge at every single point in your gap time. So a student who's really excited to take on 2 group programs, one in the fall and one in the winter/spring, could that work? Of course that could work. And maybe the first one is a little closer to their interests and their comfort, and the one in the winter and spring is a little further away and asks more of them. Or there's students who, again, just take on high levels of independence and it just keeps going and building. You're going to make this work for you. Additionally, things that are more supported, of course, have more dollar signs associated, right? As you go on an amazing gap year program, like many of them that are represented on the USA Gap Year Fairs, it's typical to see a cost anywhere between $12,000 and say $17,000 for a semester, 10 to 12 week long program. Great, that might be in your budget or it might be nowhere in your budget. but it doesn't mean you have to replicate that one chapter after the next. If you take on more independent things like volunteering or internships, the cost tends to be half or a third. And if you take on things that are much more independent, there tends to even be no cost associated. So you can really amortize out the overall cost of a gap year by actually embedding this philosophy into your year. Okay. So when it's your turn to start thinking about this, I really want to encourage you to start asking yourself and ultimately asking your kids about these questions. We want to start with the why. We then want to get into the what, the where, and the how. And then ultimately, we want to start talking about a really critical aspect of this is what I need. What do I need to be happy? I spoke with a young man today and we were talking about different options. And one of the things he said to me was, I really want to be a part of an experience where I can go to a gym regularly. It's really important for me to exercise. It's really important for my mental health. I love it. He knows himself so well, right? There's so many other students who would say that's not important to me, but he knew that was important to him. In the same way that it's important to another student to know that you want to talk virtually to your therapist once a week while on program. Great. You need to look for an experience that's going to offer that. So these are what we often call our filters. These are the critical aspects that are important for our mental and physical well-being throughout our gap time. If you take a little bit of time to start writing out the answers to these questions, I'm going to assure you that this is going to help really point the compass needle so that when you start looking at gap year options on something like go overseas or talking about it with a gap year counselor, you're going to really have a good sense of what direction you're looking for your gap year experiences. Okay, why is this all so important? Well, one of the things, and this is a quote from Only Murders in the Building, if you've happened to seen that show. One of the things I really believe strongly in is this idea that you can afford to take your time, but we can't afford to waste it. And for young adults, you're graduating from high school or you're in this particular moment of your life where you actually have a lot of agency in the timeline and the opportunities that are in front of you. High school ends, right? That's a designated chapter ending time. But all of the rest of the things that are in front of you don't have specific timelines to start. Almost every single college or university in this country will offer a student the chance to defer in order to take a gap year. So what do I mean by that? So if you applied for fall of 2024, almost every university and college will offer you the chance to write a letter and say, thank you so much for accepting me to college, blah, blah, blah. I'm most interested in coming in the fall of 2025, a year later, because I want to pursue a gap year and I want to pursue it in my interests of A, B, and C. And most universities in this country are really open to that. They're really open to it because they've seen the results of what happens when students take gap years. They track gap year students. And what they do see is that gap year students outperform non-gapping students every single semester by GPA of their college careers. Their GPAs are higher every single semester, and it's across the board in all of the colleges that have studied this. It's not a surprise if you're excited about what you're learning, if you're really engaged with the topics that you had a chance to experience in your life, and you have more clarity about what you want to study going in, you're likely going to do better. You're also less likely to transfer if you've been a gap year student. You're also much more likely to graduate in 4 years, because the average graduation rate in this country of a 4-year university, and I mean, this means 50% or more of students who go on to a 4-year school graduate in about 6 years. Gap year students tend to graduate in 4 years. And again, there's no mystery behind this. If you're clear on what you want to study, if you've gotten some of the yayas out of your system, if you're excited about going on to school because you know why you're going on to school, you're likely going to pursue the path and move forward in the way that it's designated. So this is an amazing opportunity. It's not gap year or college. It's gap year and college, or gap year and whatever else you have designated for yourself. It's an opportunity that comes somewhat once in a lifetime, because any adult knows that once you're in school and you're moving through school, if you have any debt that you're taking on, the moment you graduate, within 6 months, you have to start paying off those college loans. And once you get involved with your career, it's unlikely you're going to want to step away. And ultimately, if you do have a family, and if you do buy a house in the Bay Area, and if you do have a job that you're really invested in, all of a sudden you can wake up a couple of decades later wondering, where did all that time go? And did I do anything about it for me? And this is why I say you don't actually have time to waste. This is the moment. If you're intrigued at all by the gap year, this is a great time for you to consider right as you're graduating high school. Is it the only time? No. Of course, you could take gap time once you go on to university. Of course, you could potentially take it once you graduate. It's just more of what's the likelihood that you will? And also, maybe more importantly, what do you stand to gain by choosing to take this time before you go on to this next step in your educational journey? Now, I want to leave room open for questions, and this is a great time. I saw something come up in the chat, and so I'm just going to read that. Oh, this looks like this was from Go Overseas, which is perfect, great. But I would love it if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'd love to answer them now.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, and while our attendees might be thinking of a question right off the cuff, I have a quick question for you that we
Sure.
hear from time to time. What if my student doesn't want to go to college, or if they feel like a year is not enough, or if a year is too long? How do we
Mhm.
navigate those changes and make sure that they're prepared and ready to start back up again?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the aspects of this idea of gap time is really meeting students exactly where they are. And so some students do come into gap time starting at point A, but not really clear where their point B is, not sure if they want to go to college. Gap year is actually a great way to discover what your real interest is in college. It's a great opportunity for you to get involved in a professional investigation or to look at what your major might be. If after this gap time, students say, you know what, I discovered that I don't think college is what it is that I want, but I have discovered something else. Either I've actually already entered the workforce in a career that I'm excited about, or I noticed that there's a trade school that actually has and offers what it is I'm most excited for. Gap time can be very nurturing in that way. Again, this isn't meant to be something that derails students, and the studies that have been done of gap year students show that they don't get derailed if they know they want to go to college, but it is meant to be a nurturing experience. It's meant to be a period of time that allows students to really grow into themselves and really take that first chapter of adult life and step into it in a space of real confidence, right? That's what we want. We want for when students are going out to be autonomous, that they are actually really feeling confident about moving into that space, that everything isn't just a random investigation and that they're kind of trying to figure it all out at once. We want them to learn skills so that they ultimately feel like they can go on to that next space very successfully. I don't know if that answered your question, Ashley.
Yes, I think that pretty much fully encompasses it. Thank you
Okay,
very much,
great.
Jason. We have a question in the chat here, and from Clara. She said, "Thank you. You kind of answered this question, but how flexible are colleges about delaying admission for a gap year? I heard that the UCs don't allow it. Thanks."
Yeah, really good question. And your ear is to the ground, and it's true that the UCs and some of the California state schools are actually some of the most reticent to offer gap year opportunities. It doesn't mean that you can't. It just means with some of them you have to really you have to kind of work the system. So we've had several students who went to UCLA and they were able to find kind of that right person to grant them the opportunity to take a gap year. UC Davis has become much more open and willing to be able to offer gap time to students. But it's true, if you got into the UC of your dreams and they told you very clearly, I'm sorry that we won't be able to offer you a gap year, you might be in the position where you'd have to decide, do I forego going on my gap year and I go to UC blah 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 and I spend a year there and then I take some gap time because most schools will allow you, if you've taken, relatively full load, to take time off after the first year? Or do you say, hey, UC blah blah blah, thank you so much, but no thank you. I'll be reapplying during my gap year to your school, and you just forfeit that acceptance, take your gap time, and during the fall of your gap year, you reapply to schools. In theory, you could, of course, reapply to that school. That has been a strategy we've seen students take as well. I don't have a clear answer for you because this is everybody's individual choice. But beyond the UCs and some of these state schools, we found that basically every other school is very open to this unless you have some kind of a binding, engineering path that they're very clear they won't allow it, or if you're, recruited for sports or something like that.
Thank you, Jason. I've
Mhm.
also heard that as well, where students will reapply if the school does not allow a gap year.
Yep.
Another question here is, there was a slide with dollar signs. How much are we talking about on an average for a 1 year organized gap year? Thanks.
Right. There aren't too many year-long organized gap year programs left. They were much more abundant, 10 years ago. I think the market, honestly, of gap year students has driven the standard platform to be more semester length, but there are a few. But to answer your question, if the average cost of a semester is, let's say, $15,000, you might look to a full kind of 6 to 9 month gap year in that 30,000 to 40+ thousand range, not including airfare if you were doing like a structured facilitated program or if you're doing back-to-back semester programs. But again, that that doesn't mean there aren't other opportunities that might meet your needs and have a ton of structure that would offer the support that you want. Again, if you started in a more facilitated program and went on to something that had a little less support, but it also cost a great deal less, that might also support the budget. The other thing that we haven't talked about is that many gap year programs are able to offer college credit. This is nuanced. And what that means is for families who've saved in a 529 plan or 529 plan for higher education, you're often able to use those to pay for the entire program fee and all of those credits. And so that is a real boon for a lot of families who haven't saved for a gap year, because who's done that? Nobody really has. And so ultimately, you might be able to pay for those gap year experiences using that. The caveat to this is that not every college will allow you to essentially transfer those credits in. So if you've been pre-accepted at a school and deferred, some colleges are really clear that if you get those credits during your gap year, you're not going to be able to apply them to your undergraduate degree. Maybe that matters to you, maybe that doesn't matter to you, but either way, it's important to check in advance before you sign on the dotted line. And then the last thing I'll just say about credit during your gap year is you might be like, oh my gosh, the last thing I want is to do more school. But if you're doing one of these more experiential programs, you're unlikely to be in a classroom at any point in time during your gap year based on the experiential nature of these options. And usually what it means to earn credit in a class is you have to read one book while you're on the program. You have to keep a daily journal, which you would likely be doing anyway. And then when the program has concluded, you usually have to write a 5-page paper on the topic that you were studying. So again, it's not something that's meant to detract from your experience there. It's actually meant to enhance it, and it will likely, seem from the outside, it's unlikely anyone would even know that you're involved in a credit-bearing experience.
Thank you. We have one more question from Clara.
Sure.
How would you say a gap year is different than a semester abroad? Great
Yeah.
info. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I wish you could have been on before everybody jumped on this call, because Ashley, Deanna, and I were just talking a little bit about our own experiences. So generally, a junior year study abroad means that you are essentially going to university, but in another country or at another university, even in the US. That's an option too. And so it's essentially replicating the experience you're having at your home university, except you're somewhere else. So that's great. And that's wonderful if what you want is that academic experience. But gap year tends to be a lot more experiential. So, for example, I was talking with an amazing program that's up in Alaska today, and you live out at this incredible field station, and people are essentially, it's homesteading, right? You're catching a lot of your food, you're growing a lot of your food, you're learning about ecology and wildlife, you're paddling in the fjords up in kind of the major glacier bays, you're learning through hands-on experiences, talking to tribal elders. You're learning a tremendous amount, but you're probably never sitting down in an actual chair in a classroom setting, right? And so the idea of this is it's meant to be highly experiential. Also, I think the difference between a junior year abroad is that you already have 2 years of college, 2+ years of college under your belt. You've already dived into this very independent experience of being in college, whereas a gap year is helping you develop the skills to be able to navigate that in life in advance of that. And so do I think both have merit? Absolutely. Ashley did study abroad. I did a version of study abroad. Deanna does a version of study abroad, right? Many of us did that, but also many of us didn't have the opportunity to take a gap year in advance of going to college. And if I had had the opportunity at the time, I'm sure I would have taken it because I really could have used that before I went on to school. I didn't have a lot of the skills of independence, even though I thought I did before I went on to college.
Thank you, Jason. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I have one here for you. How
Great.
is it best to ask for a deferral once you get into college? And do gap year counselors help with that process?
Sure. Really good question. I can drop a link for you. So generally, when a college asks you to submit a deferral request, usually they want a letter, and the letter in essence says, Dear College X, my name is Jason Soroyan. I've been admitted for the class of 2024. I'm so excited to come to your college. Thank you so much. It's a dream come true. I'm really interested in studying whatever. I'm requesting a deferral to take a gap year because I want to pursue my passions in X, Y, and Z. I'm hoping to do that by studying sea turtles in Costa Rica, having an internship in South Africa in entrepreneurship, and I want to get a paid job because I've never had the opportunity to work before, and I want to earn money for college. And generally, it's as simple as that. You can suggest at the end, I think taking this gap year is going to really make me even more productive and contributing member of the community. And I hope that you will grant me this deferral. And I've basically seen every single deferral request honored. Some colleges do have a quota of the number of students that they will offer a gap year to. And I've only seen one college that actually has it's almost competitive where you have to apply to take a gap year, but only one. And beyond that, most schools are really open to this idea. And let me drop for you. And I'll answer the second part of your question right now as well about gap year consultants and what their role is. So I'm going to drop for you in the chat. I just dropped our contact info if you'd like that. But I also just dropped all of this data about gap year programs and a sample deferral letter. So if you're looking for, something that you could use as a template, you can use that. Gap year consultants, the role of gap year consultants is really to help support students from start to finish. And so, for example, some students have said, can you help guide me on my deferral process? And so we'll look at the college's website. Sometimes we'll even call the Office of Admissions to get very clear levels of explanation about what needs to be done. The student will write the letter, they will send it to me, and they'll want editing and drafts of that. Great. I'm happy to do that if a student needs my help doing that. Many students are able to do this on their own, or they do this with their family. It's not a particularly complicated process. But after that, that's when we really want to start getting into the planning. And sometimes before you submit a deferral letter, you're going to really want to have a clear sense of what it is you want to do. Maybe you don't know the exact program or experience you're going to go with, but you definitely want to know, I am going to pursue this goal and I'm going to pursue that goal. And then I'm going to pursue maybe a third or fourth goal. So gap year consultants help with that. It's important to know that there are actually only 6 accredited gap year consultants in the country. My wife Jane and I are 2 of them. That's what that seal is on this slide. It's an accreditation seal. There are lots of people who are doing gap year counseling work, but the process of becoming accredited, just like becoming an accredited gap year program, is a very high bar. Every gap year consultant who's been accredited offers some kind of a free brainstorming call. It's literally part of our accreditation that we have to offer this, which we would all do anyway. We were all doing this anyway before the accreditation was even formed. But you should take a gap year consultant up on that free call, right? It's a free brainstorming call to see, is this the right opportunity for you? And ultimately, can they help tease out some of the goals and talk to you about some of the opportunities that are out there? So I'd encourage you to have a brainstorming call with somebody and do that really soon, particularly if you're a senior. So I just want to touch on this. If you're a senior right now and it's late March, this is the moment to start looking at gap year. And you might be waiting for all of your college acceptances still. You might be waiting until you actually have to make the decision by May 1. And I'll just say, the moment you decide to take a gap year is the right one for you to start planning. It's a long process, right? It doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can take it in bite-sized chunks, but we all know what happens at the end of senior year. It's prom, it's graduation, it's senior days. gap year students kind of just evaporate during that time because everyone's really busy with great stuff. If you have time to begin planning now, if you even have that brainstorming call now, if you get a little bit of momentum of starting to look at things and get your fall option in place before the summer, you're going to breathe a sigh of relief because in the summer you can start looking at winter and spring. If you're a junior or a sophomore, this is great. This is a great time to investigate. Go overseas, go to the USA Gap Year Fairs website, start investigating options, follow programs on social media. There's awesome reels, there's awesome videos. Watch these things, follow them. And next year, when the USA Gap Year Fairs come to town, which will be in February, then go to one of the Gap Year Fairs and really start doing the investigation. But if you're a senior, the time is absolutely right now.
Thank you so much, Jason. And thanks everyone for all of those amazing questions. And again, thank you, Jason, for the wonderful presentation and very valuable information. You're really making me want to take an experiential gap year now. If anybody has more questions for Jason, we'll send his contact along with Go Overseas and USA Gap Year Fairs information for you to follow up. But thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.